Coming to you from Music City, Nashville, Tennessee, this is the Quinn Spinn. Hey now, and welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, one and all, to a brand new edition of... I didn't take a deep enough breath. The Quinn Spinn. I'm your host, Quinn. I'm back here on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Stitcher, YouTube, and more for another rousing and riveting installment of the official podcast of Underground Music Collective. You just heard Revel 9's All I've Become, our opening theme song here at the Quinn Spinn. It has been since the great year of 2014, and it will be until the very end of days. And if you are interested in learning about the creative process behind an album, have I got an episode for you. Julian Fulco Perron joins us on the show from all the way out in Denver, Colorado. I had the privilege of hopping on Zoom with Julian earlier this week, and he tells us all about his new album, In My Garden. Such a rich sense of experimentation, so creative. I mean, it would make legends like Brian Wilson, Paul McCartney proud. There are so many elements to this album, so many influences, of course, musically, but also from the times in which we live. And I say we get right to it. Let's not waste any time. I'll take you right there. All right, everyone. Thanks for jumping on here. As I said at the top of the show, I have the honor of being joined all the way from Denver, Colorado, by Julian Fulco Perron here on the Quinn Spinn today. Julian, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, man. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Likewise. The album In My Garden, I have to commend you. I really just love the rich spirit of experimentation, you know, the coloring outside the lines and how you bring that all together, bring all these different influences to the table. But we're going to get into that. But before we do, I want to give you a chance to answer the three standard questions I ask every guest here to the Quinn Spinn. Those three questions are: who are you? What are your passions? And why on earth would you want to come on the Quinn Spinn?
I'm just glad you didn't send me any math questions or anything, so I can do those. My name is Julian Fulco Perron. I'm a musician, singer-songwriter, experimental filmmaker, and by that I mean I do a lot with. I actually shoot some of my music videos and a lot of material with Super 8. So I shoot a lot of old school 60s. I got a camera from 65 that I shoot with. It still works, and a lot of stuff like that. So it's a lot of fun to experiment. And make, just an overall artist, trying to push myself in different areas, try new things. I really wanted to be here. I love what you're doing with, you know, the underground and pushing, art out there and shedding light on to a lot of art that hasn't been heard. And so I wanted to come on and spread the word about what I do and have a wonderful talk with you, because I've listened to some of the stuff you've done, some of your other interviews, and it's been fun listening. I love putting on podcasts. They're one of my favorite things, like just when I'm out and about, and gives me something to stop my brain and just take in new information. So I've been having fun kind of listening to the podcast.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, I have to give love to the guests though, because it's all, you know, it's always the guest that makes the show, you know, what they bring to the table, their insights, everything. And I've been very fortunate here in 2022 to have some really amazing humans with, you know, the openness and insight to share. So I'm looking forward to chatting too. Again, we're going to get into the album In My Garden, out now, as well as a look at the future. But before we do that, I want people to get to know you a little better and where you've been and what led you to this point. So let's go from the beginning, as far back as you want to go, Julian. The people, wow, places, experiences, and of course the musical influences that have inspired you toward this life of creativity that you're in pursuit of.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, and I was born there, kind of moved around and ended up going to school in Alaska. I didn't have a lot of, I had music growing up. My dad played guitar, and I kind of had a musical family, but I was never really drawn to it as much. I never really thought of it as anything else until I was able to kind of pick up some of my own music, music that you discover outside of your family, that it feels special to you. So some of the first stuff that I was getting into when I was a lot younger is really nothing that I'm listening to now, but it's music that I respect and will always have a place with me. So it's kind of those things. I think I ended up playing guitar first. I started when I was 10, 11, 12. It's pretty typical story with the picking up the guitar, but it ended up kind of shifting gears just recently to piano. The last 3 years or so, I picked that up, and it's just been such a songwriting tool, change in the way I approach music, having a keyboard and the knowledge of, I mean, I say knowledge, it's all self-taught, but being able to use the keyboard in conjunction with the guitar as a tool. And I taught myself how to play. You know, growing up in Alaska, I didn't have a lot of people around me that also played music. So I couldn't really find, there was one other guy that I jammed with, but he played guitar also. So I'm like, well, we can't really, what are we going to do here? So I taught myself, started playing drums. I started playing bass, and we made some music together with him on guitar, and I shifted. So I always think of myself as a reactive artist. Like whatever's around me, I try to, you know, move around and make the pieces fit. So I guess even from that early age, where my buddy who was a guitar player, trying to shift and play all the instruments around on our very first record that we made together, and sang on top of it, of course, and he filled in the guitar stuff. So that kind of was like how I started musically. It was kind of jumping around. And I mean, I don't think that could have been, I'm really happy with how it turned out, being able to jump around those instruments and now use that as a tool of, like, you know, it's some of my bigger influences to jump onto that is like Paul McCartney, Brian Wilson, some of these guys that, you know, are multi-instrumentalists in a way as well. And they think of things not from just a guitar player's perspective or just a keyboard perspective or anything like that. They're thinking of the bigger picture. And that's how I've been able to approach my art. And it's how I like to tackle songwriting, I guess, is just think of that big picture and kind of hone in on each individual aspect as you go along. So did I answer your question there? I kind of jumped around, but
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's really important for anybody listening or watching to understand the value in being malleable, being flexible, you know, finding needs to fill within the project, within the art itself. As independent creatives, you know, especially nowadays, we have to wear so many hats. You know, I know that, you know, even though I'm not an active musician, like, you know, I've got the podcast, I've got, you know, UMC, there's all these little things that go into the pot and different roles, different hats that you need to wear. And, you know, you being a filmmaker as well, you know, having film serve the music, having music serve the film, you know, these things come together and combine, and that rising tide, as we always say here at the Quinn Spinn, take a drink, raises all boats. How do you feel though that your different artistic mediums serve each other and help, you know, how does one inform the other on your end?
Yeah, no, that's fascinating you bring that up, because I actually got into filmmaking because of music. I got, you know, it kind of started out of the desire to, you know, I want to have the visual accompaniment to the songs. And it's like, what does that look like? Do I go hire a crew? Do I, you know, and we've worked with some amazing film crews and some really talented people, but something about it was just like, I want to do that. I want to like get into that. Like that pushed me to kind of learn more about it. So I started, and you know, it's just another, not in a negative way, but I think when you have somebody else making your video, you kind of have a middleman between your brain and your creative vision and where they take it. And they can obviously do some incredible things, probably better so than me being self-taught, but just to put that vision forth, it was like picking up film was a way for me to bypass some of that and just put it right down. And it was really something that just let me scratch the itch a little of let's put this visual component to the music. So I started with film itself, like with Super 8 was really, it's funny. I started shooting on Super 8 before I started shooting digitally. So I kind of didn't really know what I was getting into, of course. And I'm still finding new challenges and new, you know, battles to overcome with using an analog format, such as like the celluloid film. Like you're actually, this is like a short, you know, format. You have to like capture right to the tape what you're getting, or else it's not there. I mean, you can't do unlimited takes like you can with digital. You know, it's just kind of, it's limiting, but in a creative way. So I think that's how I've tried to approach that. And so, yeah, to answer your question, I think the video kind of came after and as a visual component and the way for me to kind of put the two together. So it's just that they've kind of naturally had that connection since one kind of spawned the other.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said too for immersing yourself in the process so you know what you're looking for, you know, because like if you were to ever outsource that, right?
Yeah.
Like you know what you want, you know the vibe, you can you have work that you've created to refer to. You know, I find that too with, you know, as UMC grows, like there's going to come a day where I'm not as involved in like the day-to-day like content creation, the podcast being a different story, you know, because this is mine, but like,
right.
you know, the reviews and all that, like but from doing that and, being in the back end of the website and understanding the SEO, like I'm able to then import that upon whoever comes in as a contributor. Right. And for you, being so immersed in these different forms of the art and how they feed each other, you know exactly what you're going for. You know exactly what you're looking for. And as you learn, more of those nuances and even run into those roadblocks, you know how to overcome them.
Yeah. No, I think so. And even there's times where now that I've been a little further along with my creative process with visuals and with video itself, I think there's times now the video informs the audio where I'll be filming something and I'll say, you know what, this isn't actually what I want to use for the song I intended for, but it just spawned this whole other idea. It could go with this type of song, and then it'll almost create new ideas. So they go hand in hand that way. Like a lot of times I'm ending up shooting something like I know what I'm going for with the film because it's already got a story around it in audio, and I'm almost kind of hearing it in my head as I shoot. But yeah, I mean, there's ways recently I've gone out to shoot some stuff and it's turned into like, oh, you know what? This isn't going to work with what I had in mind, but I've got a whole new song idea because of this location or because of, something went wrong. How can I use this in a different way? And so that's been fun too.
Yeah, yeah, and it gives you many talents to draw upon as you continue on your creative journey. And the pandemic was a time for you to discover another talent, another hobby, gardening. Gardening. And I think the pandemic was an important time for us all to go inward, discover different things, discover different interests about ourselves. I think out of necessity, because there wasn't a whole lot we could do with the outside world at that point. So what was it that drew you to gardening, and how has that inspired you as a creative?
Well, yeah, it's like you said, with the pandemic, we're all kind of stuck at home, isolation. We're all kind of looking for different ways to stay active and stay busy. And this was partly that inspired it. But I think another thing about it too is just the way things went with the pandemic and some things that led into that in my music career at the time. I felt like I was just kind of at a stopping point where like, I don't really know what's next. I don't know what I want to do, if anything, musically. And I was really kind of pursuing more film creation at the time, and that the gardening and the picking up plants and sort of taking in that like we have about 30 different house plants, and we started growing a lot of vegetables and trying to like the self-sustained sort of lifestyle. We tried that for a little while during the pandemic, and that sort of thing kind of came from this need of like I need something else to fill the void, but also something to really silence my brain. And because I'm very ADHD, and I'm very just constantly thinking about the next step and the next move, and something like a national and a global pandemic, not even national, it really puts you in perspective of like, hey, well, you have nothing to think about at this point. So it kind of let me sit back and take in a new adventure, and doing something with plants. Like it just, I didn't expect it, but it's really changed how I appreciate aspects of life, and like you feel more connected to growth, and being around something as fragile and as attuned as plants and vegetation really, I think, teaches you to slow down, take in things as they come, to just really appreciate the current moment, and not to get too spiritual on you, but I'm very Zen and Buddhist mindset. So just taking in something like the plants really let me sink into that mindset a lot more.
Yeah. And I think, it's important to slow down. And as creatives, especially independent ones, we don't have a lot of time to do that when things are quote unquote normal, or new normal or whatever they are now. Right. Like we're judge, jury, and executioner. I like to say we're responsible for everything, and the pandemic, for all of the bad that it brought about, for all of the things that we wish wouldn't have happened, it did give us that chance to slow down, whether we wanted it or not. Right. And from that, you learn new skills, you come to new realizations about yourself, and it gives you, slowing down gives you that step back from that go, that constantly being in the fray. And I think, something that I've personally, had to come back around to all over again this year was like the need to just take a step back, slow down, and just take a pause and just like assess the next step, because that's where the clarity is going to come from. And
Yeah.
that's where you're going to become more connected, and feel more refreshed coming back to something like music, to something that requires, so much of your attention all the time to continue growing and building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I think that's true. Yeah, it's taught me to too. Also, just even with when you're in that mode and that mindset of go go go, like even just taking shorter breaks, nothing super extended like a pandemic, but just like allowing yourself to take incremental breaks really increases your productivity by the end tenfold. I mean, like instead of, I try to apply this now every time I'm in the studio of like taking breaks, even when I am sometimes in a groove. I'm like, I don't want to take a break, but I find that if I do, I'm able to kind of come back even fresher than I thought I was. And, you just have those moments that something I never would have thought of before of like, well, I'm not tired. I don't need a break. Like, let's just keep going, pound it out, like work through it. And it just like, these small incremental breaks really increase your productivity and the workload you're able to take on.
I'm so glad you said that because like
Yeah.
I'm battling that with within myself right now. It's like I told you before we started recording, like I'm driving to New Jersey next week, and like there's a part of me that's just like, but I'm so in the zone right now, and I just want to keep going. I want to keep going, but like I know that that's going to be good for me because I'm going to get,
Yeah.
not that I'm totally going to shut off, but like I'm going to get to kind of go half speed for a couple weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and like I'm not going to realize how much I needed that until I'm driving back to Nashville. Like, ooh, okay, that was good actually. Like
Yeah.
now I'm ready. Like we all need it, whether we think we do or not. And sometimes, I think that comes from a place of putting pressure on ourselves, right? That just desire to just keep going. I don't want to stop momentum. Well,
Yeah.
around the holidays, momentum just stops, whether you want it to or not. So it's good. It's a good time to just take a breather. And we
Yeah.
need to remind ourselves, like, even when we're humming along, like, you don't want to burn yourself out. And, as somebody who has burned himself out on more than one occasion personally, like, I'm so glad you said that because I think it's an important point to just remember to take those pauses, even if it doesn't feel like we need them.
Mm-hmm. And it makes you want to come back even more, like especially if you're in a groove, you just like you're looking forward to getting back to it, which I think is powerful too. Because most of the time you're like, oh, I got to get back to this, But if you take a break when you're feeling good about things, you almost have like a new life and a new momentum about them in that way as well. So
Yeah,
yeah,
you come
totally.
back, you're chomping at the bit. You're just like,
Yeah.
you know exactly what you want to do when you step back into it, and you get to doing it. Yeah, exactly right. And it's an important thing to just keep in mind, especially this time of year. I was just on a client call about an hour ago. We were talking about the same thing, where it's like, all right, things are going to slow down, so let's
Yeah.
let them. Let's
Right.
enjoy the pause because
Exactly.
January starts and it all starts again. And in the meantime, people have plenty of great music to listen to, including your new album, In My Garden, out now, which again, can't say enough about how much I enjoyed this as a listener, as a music fan, with a trained ear. So much of this inspired, of course, by that pivotal time period of COVID, that pause and reflect opportunity that you had. And again, such a rich spirit of experimentation, you name Brian Wilson, Paul McCartney as primary influences of yours, and I think they'd be really proud of this record, because of the rich spirit of experimentation that's here. In your words, though, in your estimation, I want to know how this marks an evolution for you as an artist and how this stands out from anything that you've done previously.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because yeah, I mean it's very much inspired by the works of those artists and a lot of the artists from that time period, 60s, 70s, 80s, even going earlier, just when the studio is an instrument, I mean, it's still treated that way today a lot by a lot of people. And, but it was like the limitations that they had in that day, especially working with tape, being on an analog format. You're like, hey, I don't like, they had to sit there and know what they wanted to do and make good songs like because of it. They were forced into this sort of narrow mindset of like, this is what we have to work with. And like, even if you had a million keyboards or all the guitars at your disposal, they still kind of had limitations to that too. I mean, like analog synths and stuff, you're like, this has one sound and this is this is a Moog, this is what it's going to sound like, so I'm going to kind of just apply it. And a lot of times today we have too many options. We're like, I've got a keyboard that has every sound in the world on it, what do I do with every sound? So I really admire and try to put myself in the creative space that these guys had back in the day of like, let's not get so caught up in what we're using as our tools and our medium, but let's just like, how can we apply these? So this album really is showcasing that. I think I use Mellotron a lot as like my, there's a lot of strings and horns and a lot of orchestrated parts that I write out, and I hire some players to come in. And that's very important for me too, is to have, I want to have actual musicians on this that play. I'm not trying to do MIDI and analog, like, you know, the digital sounds of like, you know, it's all fine and dandy. I'm not against using any of that stuff. But for me, I like having a musician come in and recording their horn part, their take on my orchestration, or their, you know, seeing how it comes in the little changes of like, they understand their instrument more than I do. So they'll adapt it in kind of a way that makes more sense to them. And that to me is lost when you're using a MIDI pack or some stuff like that. I mean, I don't even use MIDI, to be honest with you. So it's I don't actually have any MIDI, so I don't really know how it works, but I've seen people that use it and I'm like, wow, my workflow would be so much easier if I used all that stuff. But to me, it's not about that. It's about getting through with what I have. And so this album is a way for me to kind of sit back, strip down, and use the components that are in a studio that you might have found back in the 60s and 70s and things like that. So, I mean, it's not 100% true to the day, and that's not what I was trying to do, but it's me trying to put myself in that creative space and seeing what the record would sound like.
And there's such a richness and I think a liveliness to that live instrumentation as well.
Yeah.
You know, it brings so much more character to the soundscape, to your point. You know, just having somebody in there who knows their instrument, who knows how to get the most out of their instrument and serve the song with it, you know. And there are so many just incredible moments where that happens here on the record. And I want to know what some of your favorite moments from the record or even the creative process are,
yeah,
you know, in creating these soundscapes. What really stands out to you?
Well, I'll say it's a lot of fun, like adding layers and finding how many layers is enough to serve the song, and how sparse something can be to make it work. Because there's been times where, you know, I've gone through, for people that don't know, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, he had a lot of, you know, he'd be sitting there adding a lot of layers, and just back in the day, just like how many, you know, full orchestras and then them on top of it with their band and all these vocal harmonies and things like that. And it's like, that inspires me, but also I've gone too far with it to where I've had to like, I'll sit there with all these tracks and they're just not working together, just as well as you cut it back down to what the demo was. And you're like, oh, this had like 4 tracks and it's working way better. So it was a way. What was the initial question again? I guess about the soundscapes, right? Like,
yeah, and some of your favorite moments on the record
come
out, the creative process itself.
Yeah. I mean, so sitting down there with the layers of like vocal harmony, and I'm harmonizing with myself, so it's fun to, you know, I have to do it in layers just as one person naturally. That's how it goes. But it's fun for me to sit there and again, yeah, just see how much is enough to serve the song and how much is too much. And finding that line, I think, is the fun part of the creative process. And, you know, and doing things in different ways. For example, I have on the record 2 versions of the same song. There's one called Can't Be Trusted, and there's an A version and a B version, which actually could sound like it has a dual purpose in the naming. It's like the A side and the B side, but it also stands for more of the A side is the more acoustic version and the B side is more brass. It's got full horn instrumentation and things like that. So it really worked for me of like, you know, I started this song actually with my last band, and it was much more of a heavy sound, a heavy like Stones sort of feel, or like even harder rock sort of feel. And the song never materialized with the last project. And so moving it into this area, more acoustic based and trying something, the version on the album labeled Can't Be Trusted A is the acoustic version. That is the one I started with for this project, this album. I was writing it, recording it. I almost have the whole thing done. And I'm like, this isn't the right version. I got to try something else. So I completely went through a bunch of iterations to land on the B version, the brass version, to get this full horn. I kept hearing this horn or instrumentation, and there's like a full, it's almost inspired, I'd say, but like Louis Armstrong, a lot of like New Orleans style, like Dixieland jazz. Like I grew up a lot. I grew up in Texas partly as well as Alaska. So I did a lot of bouncing around, and a lot of the Texas side of things was that New Orleans, like Southeast Texas. We had a lot of instrumentation of like a lot of jazz where I grew up. So it was kind of like that Dixieland version of this song that I wrote. Is like a folk song, Can't Be Trusted. So it's fun for that to, both of those versions to coexist on the same album. I thought they had to. So that's just one example of like how I think bouncing around the album. It's probably one of my favorite parts about it is that I was able to make two versions of the same song, but I think they serve a different purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and each one brings different things out, brings out different colors, different personality, and I think being able to hear that, being able to understand like how to reinterpret your own work, and how to reimagine things, it's such a powerful tool, I think, to have in your belt as an artist, because that translates not only to the recording, but also to your live show. How do you want to bring this out in a live show?
Yeah.
How do you want to bring it out in different live show settings, like a listening room versus like a full band experience, like there's so many different ways that you can go once you really, I guess, hone that ability to hear those things and really pull different things out of these songs, and in different moments. And again, just, I think, a masterful job of doing that here on the record. Really just so many enjoyable moments and dynamic shifts and, different moods and different colors. Really, I think it's tremendous work. And,
Thanks.
thematically too, I want to go a little bit into the themes here on the record. As far as lyrically, what do you hope people, listeners, take away from the experience that is In My Garden?
Yeah, I think a lot of it came from like again, this album came from the pandemic. It kind of came from a time where I wasn't really thinking I was going to be making a record or making music at all, but being around this new lifestyle, this new passion of gardening and being around different plants and kind of being in there with the soil, doing all these things, it brought me closer to nature. It brought me closer to myself. It kind of let me realize that, yeah, we are all connected. We are all one in this. And again, it let me slow down, kind of step back and just really breathe. And that's what kind of I hope comes across in the album of like, hey, we are all, connected. The album's called In My Garden. Come into my garden, come sit down. It's almost like this experience of like, come, join me in the plants and sit back. And I think a lot of it has some tonality that's and very similar to, it's all based around plant life and the engagement of that. So I kind of try to work that in lyrically in sort of a double meaning. You might read it as one thing, and it's really more about something within you, even though it's, like a song called Flower Girl sounds kind of on the nose about, being, it could be interpreted however you want, but I kind of see it more as like a deep within the watering process and the nurture experience of human, like how can you kind of get within that mindset of just, we are one, we are all connected with nature. So I think lyrically, yeah, I'm trying to put that across to the listener of like, hey, we are all connected in this, we're all one. Sit back, really listen to yourself and listen to your surroundings.
Yeah. I mean, we're all sharing the same planet at the end of the day,
Yeah.
That's the thing that connects us all, regardless of where we are on that planet, regardless of our ideas and beliefs, regardless of our experiences. We're all here. We're all on this spinning blue space rock trying to make it work,
Yeah.
And it's important to understand that level of connectedness, not only to each other, but to everything around us. And yeah, I think it's an important message, of course, for this time, this particular decade of the 2020s, where there's been so much of this backbiting, so much of this butting heads going on. At the end of the day, like, we're all just here to try to make this thing work. And
Yeah.
I always appreciate work that speaks to the times. And I think this hits the nail on the head, man.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
So what's next for you? 2023, of course, coming up. We're winding down here at the end of the year, but you've got some plans coming up in the new year.
Yeah, so next year I'm very excited. Like, more music on the way, of course. I want to try to something I try to do with every album is kind of pick up different genres and different influences that I have and try to put them in to my music. So this one is like In My Garden is more of a folk rock classic vibe. The first record I did was called Dreamland. It's very experimental, psychedelic rock sort of feel. It's a concept album kind of based around the ideas of the whole album is like one sleep cycle and what happens within your dreams as you weave through them. So it's that sort of psychedelic nature. And going through to what I have next is, I think, more of a disco funk inspired sort of record, like some Bee Gees, some Hall and Oates, some Michael Jackson's, Paul McCartney from the 80s, like some of his more 80s records and that kind of vibe, like ABBA, just playing around with some of these later themes and kind of what that would entail, but also weaving in some more modern themes as well with like Tame Impala. I really like a lot of I'm blanking out. Thundercat. Thundercat's one I've been listening to a lot lately as well. I love his work. So Ginger Root is another cool artist that maybe some people don't know as much. He's kind of like a Japanese influenced city pop is what it's called. So it's like this very, I've been listening to a lot of music from different parts of the world. And so putting that in the next record, I think, is where I want to go. It's very thematically different from the last one. And I think that's important for me too, is like to keep me interested and to keep me engaged of like doing something completely different. And I think it's fun for the listener too, to like, it's like these older artists I've always loved. Like Queen is another one of my favorite influences. You listen to what they do, and it's like every album they did was like very different, but you still know it's Queen. You still listen to it and it feels like that band. I mean, the Beatles were the same way. The Beach Boys, to an extent, they didn't go as far as some of these other guys, but you could hear it in the 70s. They got a little more like, hippie vibes, where they started more surf rock, and they kind of, or not surf rock, but the surf pop sort of influence stuff. Mm-hmm. And guys like David Bowie, I mean, he always was changing the times with what he did. So that's kind of how I picture my next release and just kind of my career at this point, is where I want to keep weaving in different sounds, Talking Heads. I mean, just different sort of vibes as I go along. And then as far as the live show, I've kind of recently this year got it started again with playing. I hadn't played live since my last project, and this year was able to kind of been working with a new live band and keeping along that flexibility of playing solo, doing some other shows like that. And this band is, like we touched on a little bit earlier, about taking these songs with such deep layers and a lot of instrumentation, sometimes full horn sections or full string sections, and how do you apply that to live? And that's something I stressed over for a long time, until I realized, like, well, it doesn't have to be the same version. It shouldn't be. It should be its own thing. It really should stand on its own. So that's been a process I'm very proud of to see kind of come to fruition, is incorporating that live band into a show and bringing these songs to life. So I'm going to be definitely plan on playing around Denver, Colorado area. And next year, I'm actually planning to go to Europe. We're visiting, but I'm planning we've got some really cool things lined up. I'm going to be trying to go to a few different countries. So I'm very excited, try to play some shows over in the UK, do some shows in London, maybe in Liverpool, try to go out to Scotland, do some stuff in Amsterdam, Germany, down to Switzerland. I think we're even going to try to go, all the way as far. We might even go to Italy. I mean, we're really planning some cool things here. So I think musically, hopefully that comes as a part of it. And we're able to I really want to even make an album while I'm over there. I'm trying to play with the idea of how would an national or international abroad, like sort of album work together. So I'm trying to work some things together, but I'm very excited for where that's going to come. International. I'm going international this next year.
There we go. Beautiful goal to have. I want to touch on something you said there too. When you were naming these different influences and the ways they evolve through their career, I think that's really important to keep in mind too, because your Bowies, your Queens of the world, the Beatles, of course, like the Rolling Stone, like all of the artists that have endured over time evolve, and then no one album's the same. But to your point, like there's a common thread that's just undeniably them in every single thing they do. It's not to chase a trend, it's not to chase a particular sound, it's not to do what's hot in that moment and just lather, rinse, repeat. It's to continue to push yourself creatively. But The connection actually comes from having that be genuine, having that be authentic, and connecting with the audience and what's inside of them, and I feel like the artists that endure over time, for 20, 30 years, at high levels are the ones that have that artist audience connection to the point where it doesn't necessarily matter what sound they're going for on a particular project. It matters that they are the ones doing it. Right.
Yeah.
I think it's so important for artists to keep in mind, because being here in Nashville, you see, I think a lot of younger artists in particular come to town and like, okay, what are people doing? I need to go do that. It's not necessarily what they want to create. Yeah. Right. But the artists that really endure and really have that connection over time are the ones that just find a way to create what they want to create and find their particular audience, what connects them as people to their audience, as opposed to, oh, well, yeah, this sounds like, this popular sound at the time. Well, let's just go chase that. And, until the well runs dry. It's always pushing yourself creatively and finding the people that it resonates with. I think it's a very important, powerful point.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. It's important to push yourself, find new areas for yourself too, grow in areas you never thought you could, especially, going in directions that you may not be as well versed in, and like putting in the research and the work of like, not necessarily in a historical way, but the research in like how you want to do something, like just picturing how you want something to sound, and it never ends up how you picture it starting. So it's always fun to have a goal and then see where it ends up. I mean, like I wasn't anticipating making the album I just made, and I wasn't anticipating making an album at all. So it just came out. You never know where you're going to end up on the other side of something like that.
Yeah. And it keeps it interesting for you too, because you don't want to get bored, just
right.
trying to recreate something, you want to always create the next thing,
Yeah.
Keep it interesting for yourself, keep yourself inspired. And
definitely,
when that road leads somewhere unexpected and you're happy with where it leads, like that only inspires you to see where else it could lead,
Yeah.
I think it's a really important thing, again, for artists to keep in mind is like, don't be so precious about like, it has to be this, it has to come out this way. It's got to sound like this because this person are doing it. Let it breathe. Mm-hmm. Let it be yours.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we are coming up on time. Julian Fulco Perron joining us here on the Quinn Spinn. So happy that we got to do this. Before I do all my sign-off stuff, I want to give you a chance to let people know where they can learn more about you and stream the album.
Thanks, man. Well, thank you again for having me. It's been a lot of fun talking with you, and I'm looking forward to doing it again. And everyone can find me at julianfulcoperron.com. It's not the easiest name to spell, so I know, but everything else, all my socials is at Julian Fulco Perron, your YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all that's good stuff. Spotify, Apple Music, everything at Julian Fulco Perron.
All right. Make sure you check it out. In My Garden, out now. Best of luck the rest of 2022 into 2023. We'll do this again. And of course, if you're ever coming this way in Nashville, let's do something.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I will keep you in mind.
Absolutely. This has been the Quinn Spinn, 2 N's and Quinn, 2 N's and Spin. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Stitcher, YouTube, and more. Also on the socials, namely Instagram, Quinn Spinn Official. That's the main one that we keep most active. Twitter as well, and to an extent Facebook, although Facebook doesn't really matter that much anymore, at least not in my opinion. Underground Music Collective as well, our central hub for all things independent music, creativity, community, and more. You can find us on all the socials, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter. The UMC 20 Spotify playlist is updated every single Tuesday with 20 fresh tracks and the latest episode of this podcast. Also, NashLive.live, where your hookup for independent music live events here in Nashville in 2023. Going to be announcing some stuff very soon. I've got a couple bills coming together and more ideas in the can. So stay tuned there. Revel 9's All I Become, going to take us out just like it brought us in. I'll see you next time.
Now